I was one decision away from the career I had spent my life chasing. The moment I made my choice, I had no idea what it would cost me years later. The first time I turned down a promotion, I felt my entire future shift under my feet. Not because I was not capable of doing the job, not because I was scared of the responsibility, but because I knew exactly what it would cost me. Back then, I was the kind of guy people pointed at during meetings and said, "That is the one to watch." I worked for a mid-sized logistics company just outside Chicago. Nothing glamorous, but solid, stable. The kind of place where you could build something real if you were willing to grind for it. And I was willing. In my late 20s, I practically lived in that office. I was the first one in and usually the last to leave. I volunteered for projects nobody else wanted. If there was a crisis at 10 at night, I answered the call. If a client was upset, I drove across town to smooth it over in person. I liked the feeling of being needed. I liked the momentum. At home, things were different. My wife, Emily, had this way of looking at me when I came through the door after dark. Not angry, not even disappointed, just tired. She would already have the kids in their pajamas. Our son, Caleb, would be half asleep on the couch waiting to show me some drawing from school. Our daughter, Sophie, would run to hug my legs before I could even take off my shoes. I would scoop them up, breathe in that warm, shampoo smell from their hair, and tell myself it was temporary. Just a season. Just until I secured the next step. That was the unspoken rule in my industry. Success required trade-offs. You put in the hours now so you could relax later. You miss a few dinners so you can afford better ones down the road. You sacrifice the present for the promise of something bigger. I watched it happen all around me. Guys I started with were climbing fast. Promotions, bonuses, bigger titles. They wore it like armor. Their phones never left their hands. They joked about sleeping in the office during peak season. One of them even bragged about missing his anniversary because a regional director needed him in Dallas. He said it like it was a badge of honor. I laughed along at the time, but there were small cracks forming that I did not talk about. Like the night I came home after closing a major contract. Everyone at the office had slapped my back, called me a machine. I felt 10 feet tall walking to my car. I was already picturing the email announcement, the recognition. When I opened my front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold plate of food in front of her. She had waited. The kids were already asleep. She told me Caleb had asked 3 times if I was coming to his school presentation. I had forgotten. Completely. I remember standing there, still wearing my suit jacket, feeling this sharp sting in my chest. Not guilt exactly. Something heavier. I told myself it was one missed presentation. One small thing in the grand scheme of building a better life for them. That is how it starts. A few weeks later, my manager, Richard, called me into his office. He shut the door, leaned back in his chair, and gave me that look. The one that says your life is about to change. He told me corporate had noticed my numbers. They were restructuring leadership in the Midwest region. There was a director position opening up in Denver. Bigger salary, bigger team, fast track to vice president within a few years. There was only one catch. Relocation within 3 months. Travel at least twice a month. Even longer hours. Total commitment. He said it like it was obvious I would say yes. I nodded, kept my face steady, but inside something shifted. Because for the first time, I did not immediately picture the title. I pictured Caleb sitting in that tiny plastic chair at school, scanning the room for me. And I realized this was not just a promotion. It was a fork in the road. And whatever I chose, something important was going to be left behind. When I walked out of Richard's office that afternoon, I felt like everyone could see the decision hanging over my head. Word travels fast in a place like that. People noticed when you got called behind closed doors. A couple of guys gave me knowing smiles as I passed their desks. One of them, Marcus, nudged my shoulder and said I better not forget them when I had a corner office in Denver. I smiled back. I even made a joke about practicing my ski skills. Inside, though, I was unsettled. That night, I did not say anything right away. I sat at the dinner table with Emily and the kids, watching Sophie smear mashed potatoes across her plate and Caleb explain, in serious detail, how his class pet turtle had escaped its tank. Normally, my mind would have drifted to emails waiting for me, to projections, to next quarter's targets. Instead, I just watched them. Emily caught me staring at the kids and asked if something was wrong. I shook my head, said I was just tired. Later, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, I finally told her. I laid it out like it was a business proposal. Denver. Director title. Significant raise. Clear path upward. I even mentioned the school district rankings, because I had already looked them up. Emily listened without interrupting. She just held her mug of tea with both hands and stared at the steam rising from it. When I finished, I expected excitement. Maybe a little fear mixed in, but mostly pride. Instead, she asked one simple question. What would it mean for us? Not for you. For us. I started listing practical things. New house. Better savings. College funds. Family vacations we had only talked about. She nodded slowly. Then she asked how often I would be traveling. I told her the truth. At least twice a month. Maybe more during busy seasons. She asked what my hours would look like. I hesitated. That was answer enough. The truth was, the director role was not just a step up. It was a lifestyle. It meant being on call constantly. It meant dinners interrupted by conference calls. It meant missing things and calling it necessary. Emily did not cry. She did not argue. She just leaned back in her chair and said she was proud of me no matter what. That almost made it worse, because I could see it in her face. She was already calculating the weight she would carry if I said yes. School pickups, doctor appointments, bedtime routines, all of it falling heavier on her shoulders. The next few weeks were strange. At work, Richard started including me in higher-level meetings. Almost like a trial run. I was looped into strategy calls with executives. I stayed later than usual, trying to prove I was ready. At home, I started noticing things I had somehow ignored before. Like how Caleb looked at the door around 6 in the evening, almost on instinct. Or how Sophie had stopped asking if I would be home for dinner and instead asked her mom. There were subtle signs of the cost of my ambition. One Saturday morning, I promised Caleb I would help him build a model volcano for a science project. We laid everything out on the kitchen table. Baking soda, vinegar, food coloring. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. He said corporate wanted some numbers adjusted before Monday. Needed my input right away. It would only take a few minutes. I told Caleb I would be right back. I stepped into the bedroom and shut the door. 45 minutes later, when I came out, the volcano was finished. Emily had helped him. They had even tested it. The red foam had already dried down the sides. Caleb smiled when he saw me, but there was something in it. A kind of acceptance. Like he had already learned not to expect too much. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I kept telling myself this was temporary. That once I secured the director role, once we were financially solid, I would scale back. I would be more present. But deep down, I knew that was not how it worked. Every promotion came with a new price, and I was starting to wonder if I had already paid more than I meant to. Then the pressure shifted. Richard called me in again, this time with a different tone. Corporate wanted an answer. They could not wait much longer. If I was serious about my future, this was the moment to prove it. He leaned forward and said something that stuck with me. Opportunities like this do not come twice, Daniel. He said my name like it was a challenge. And for the first time in my career, I was not sure climbing higher was the same thing as moving forward. But I still had not made my choice. And time was running out. The day I was supposed to give Richard my answer, I woke up before my alarm. It was still dark outside. The house was quiet in that heavy, early morning way where everything feels suspended. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Emily breathe beside me. I had imagined this moment differently. I thought when the big opportunity came, I would feel excitement, certainty, that rush of knowing I was stepping into something bigger. Instead, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I did not fully understand. At work, the atmosphere had changed. It was subtle, but I could feel it. Word had spread. People were already treating me like I was halfway out the door. Marcus had started asking if I needed recommendations for Denver neighborhoods. A couple of the junior managers began looping me into conversations as if I were already their boss. Richard called me into his office right after lunch. He did not waste time. He said corporate was finalizing the list by the end of the week. If I wanted the director position, it was mine. But he needed my verbal commitment now. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach, watching me like a poker player waiting for a tell. Then he added something new. There was another candidate. A guy from St. Louis. Strong numbers. Aggressive. Hungry. If you hesitate, Richard said, they will not. It was not a threat. It was just the culture. Ambition had a rhythm, and if you missed a beat, someone else filled the space. For a second, my old instincts kicked in. The competitive part of me. The part that hated losing. I imagined the St. Louis guy stepping into that office in Denver, shaking hands, building a reputation that could have been mine. I pictured myself staying in my current role while everyone else moved forward. Richard must have seen something flicker in my face because he smiled. "This is what you have been working for, Daniel," he said. "Do not let comfort hold you back." Comfort. That word stuck, because nothing about my home life felt comfortable in the lazy sense. It was chaotic, loud, exhausting sometimes, but it was real. I asked him for one more night. He did not like it, but he agreed. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. I left my laptop in the car on purpose. Emily was in the kitchen helping Sophie with spelling words. Caleb was sprawled on the living room floor with a stack of trading cards. When I walked in, they looked surprised. Not excited. Surprised. Caleb asked if I forgot something at work. I told him no. I just wanted to be home. We ate dinner together. No phones. No calls. I even ignored 2 messages from Richard. Afterward, I helped Caleb practice his reading. He stumbled over a few words, then looked up at me with that serious expression he gets when he is trying to prove himself. "Did you see my volcano?" he asked. I swallowed. I told him it was great, that I was proud of him. He nodded like that was enough. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Emily and I sat on the back porch. It was cool outside. The kind of early fall air that smells faintly like leaves and distant fireplaces. I told her I had to give my answer in the morning. She did not tell me what to do. She just said something that changed everything. "I can handle more," she said quietly. "If that is what you want. I can carry more at home. But I do not want to carry you missing their childhood." That sentence landed heavier than any corporate pressure. I realized then that this was not just about travel or longer hours. It was about becoming a different kind of father. The kind who shows up at milestones through photos sent by text. The kind who explains absence as necessity. The kind who tells himself he will make it up later. And maybe I could have done that. Maybe I would have justified it for years. But something unexpected happened the next morning. When I walked into the office, ready to give my answer, I found out the St. Louis candidate had already accepted. Corporate had moved faster than expected. The position was filled. Richard looked annoyed. Not at me exactly, but at the situation. He said timing was everything. That maybe another opportunity would come down the line. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something closer to humiliation. The choice had been taken out of my hands. And I could not shake the feeling that I had just stepped off the path everyone expected me to take. But what I did not know yet was that the real test was still ahead. Because a few weeks later, a second offer came. And this time, there would be no one else to make the decision for me. The second offer did not come with applause or backslaps. It came quietly, and it came personal. About 3 weeks after the Denver position was filled, Richard called me into his office again. His tone was different this time. Less celebratory. More calculated. Corporate was creating a new role. Not regional. National. Director of Operations Strategy. It would not require relocation. I could stay in Chicago. But the expectations were clear. I would be overseeing multiple branches. Travel would be heavier than Denver. Some months, I would barely be home. The hours would stretch even further. In return, the salary would jump significantly. Bonuses tied to performance across the board. Fast track written all over it. He slid the folder across the desk and said something that hit harder than anything before. "This one was built with you in mind." Now it was not just about ambition. It was about identity. They saw me as someone who belonged at that level. The drive home that day felt longer than usual. I kept replaying his words. Built with you in mind. It felt like validation. Like proof that all those late nights, all those missed dinners, had meant something. But there was something else tangled up in it. Fear. Fear that if I said no, the doors would close for good. That I would be labeled reliable, but not exceptional. Steady, but not leadership material. At home, I did not tell Emily right away. Instead, I started testing the waters without saying it was a test. I stayed late 3 nights in a row, pretending there were emergencies. I took a Saturday call during breakfast and stepped outside for almost an hour. I watched how it affected the house. Caleb barely reacted anymore when I stepped away. He just kept eating his cereal. Sophie climbed into Emily's lap instead of mine when I came back inside. Emily did not complain. She just adjusted. That was the part that scared me most. They were already adapting to my absence. One evening, after another long day, I came home to find Emily sitting at the kitchen table alone. The kids were at a friend's house. She looked tired in a way I had not noticed before. Not physically, Deeper than that. I finally told her about the new role. This time, I did not pitch it like a business case. I just laid out the facts. More money, more travel, more pressure. She listened the same way she had before. But this time, she asked something different. If you say yes, who do you think you will become? That question stuck in my chest. I had always framed this as sacrifice for them. Working harder so they could have more. Climbing higher so they would feel secure. But I had never really asked who I would become in the process. I started picturing the version of myself in that role. Sharp suit, constant flights, phone buzzing at all hours, missing school plays but sending expensive gifts instead, justifying everything as temporary. I also pictured another version. Same house, same job, slower progression, maybe even stagnation in the eyes of corporate. But present, coaching Little League, showing up. The next day at work, Marcus cornered me in the break room. He had heard rumors. When I confirmed there was another offer, his eyes lit up. "Man, this is it," he said. "You cannot turn this down. This is how you secure your future." He told me about his cousin who worked himself into a corner office by 40. Said sacrifice was part of the deal. "Kids do not remember the hours," he said. "They remember the lifestyle." I nodded, but something in me pushed back. Because I remembered my own father. He worked construction, long hours, physically drained every night. We did not have much money, but he was there. Every game, every parent-teacher meeting, every scraped knee. I did not remember the brand of shoes I wore as a kid. I remembered him in the stands. That night, after the kids were asleep, I walked into Caleb's room and sat on the edge of his bed. I watched him breathe, his small hand curled near his face. I realized something uncomfortable. If I said yes, I would not be choosing ambition over laziness. I would be choosing ambition over presence. And the consequences would not show up immediately. They would show up slowly, quietly, in the spaces where I was missing. The deadline for my answer was Friday. This time, no one else was going to make the decision for me. And whatever I chose, I knew it would define more than just my career. It would define the kind of man my children grew up watching. Friday morning felt heavier than it should have. I sat in my car in the office parking lot for a full 5 minutes before going inside. Engine off, hands on the steering wheel. Watching other employees walk toward the building with coffee cups and distracted expressions. Nobody knew this was a turning point for me. Or maybe they did. When I finally walked into Richard's office, he did not bother with small talk. He shut the door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "So," he said, "are you ready?" I took a breath, and for a split second, I imagined saying yes. I imagined the relief on his face, the handshake, the congratulations, the email blast announcing my promotion, the quiet envy from colleagues. It would have been easy. Instead, I heard myself say something I had never said before in my career. "I am grateful for the offer," I told him, "but I am not going to take it." The silence that followed felt thick. Richard blinked like he was waiting for a punchline. "I am not willing to take on that level of travel right now," I continued. "Not with where my family is." His jaw tightened. Not angry, just disappointed. He told me he respected the honesty. He said family was important. Then he added something that landed like a warning. "These windows do not stay open forever." I nodded. I knew that. When I left his office, I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just steady. By the end of the day, people knew. Marcus pulled me aside and asked if the rumors were true. When I confirmed it, his expression shifted from confusion to something like disbelief. "Man," he said, lowering his voice, "you just walked away from the fast track." I told him maybe I was choosing a different track. He laughed like I was trying to soften the blow. That afternoon, my inbox felt different. A little quieter. A little less urgent. I was still respected. Still valued. But the energy around me shifted. I had stepped off the expected path. At home that night, I told Emily. She did not throw her arms around me. She did not cry. She just let out a slow breath. "Are you sure?" she asked. I told her yes. Not because I lacked ambition. Not because I was afraid. Because I knew what I would lose. Later that evening, I helped Caleb practice his baseball swing in the backyard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. Sophie sat on the porch steps, clapping every time he made contact. There was nothing glamorous about it. No bonus attached. No title change. Just the sound of a bat hitting a ball. My son grinning at me like I had just handed him the world. But the consequences did not wait long. Within a month, the new director started reshuffling responsibilities. Some of the high-visibility projects I used to lead were reassigned. I was still part of the team, but no longer the centerpiece. I told myself it did not matter. Then annual review season came. Richard was professional, as always. He praised my performance, said I was dependable, solid. Then he used a word I had never heard applied to me before. Stable. He said it like it was a compliment. It did not feel like one. The bonus that year was smaller than I expected. The next round of leadership training did not include my name. I watched as younger managers leaned forward in meetings, hungry in the way I used to be. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I had made a mistake. If 10 years from now, I would look back and regret not pushing harder. Then something unexpected happened. Caleb's teacher called one afternoon and left a voicemail. He had written an essay about his hero. I assumed it would be some athlete, maybe a firefighter. When I got home, he handed it to me shyly. It was about me. He wrote that his hero was his dad because he comes to my games and helps me with hard stuff even when he is tired. I sat on the edge of his bed reading those crooked pencil letters, and something inside me cracked open. At work, I might have stepped back. At home, I had stepped in. Still, there were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I had given up. Because choosing family did not erase ambition. It just meant carrying it differently. And the real test was not going to be 1 year later. It was going to come when the gap between me and the guys who kept climbing became impossible to ignore. The first year after I turned down the promotion, I told myself I had balanced everything perfectly. I was home for dinner most nights. I coached Caleb's baseball team. I sat through every single one of Sophie's dance recitals, even the long ones where the music blended together and the auditorium seats made my back ache. On paper, I was winning. At work, though, the gap started widening. The St. Louis guy who had taken Denver was now overseeing 3 regions. The new strategy director flew in once a month, sharp and polished, shaking hands and talking about expansion like it was inevitable. I was still there, still competent, still respected, but I was no longer rising. You do not feel it all at once. It happens slowly. Meetings you used to lead become meetings you attend. Decisions you used to shape become decisions you are informed about. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at the far end of the conference table while a younger manager presented a plan I had originally drafted months earlier. He barely acknowledged me. No one else did either. I told myself it did not matter. But it did. Ambition does not disappear just because you choose something else. It lingers. It whispers. There were moments when I caught myself scrolling through LinkedIn late at night, looking at the titles of guys I used to compete with. Vice President, Senior Director, Executive Lead. I wondered what my profile would have looked like if I had said yes. At home, life kept moving. Caleb started middle school. Sophie lost her first tooth and insisted I be the one to put it under her pillow. Emily seemed lighter somehow, less stretched. We talked more in the evenings. About normal things. About books. About future trips we might actually take. One Friday night, I helped Caleb study for a math test. He was frustrated, almost in tears. We sat at the kitchen table for over an hour working through fractions. When he finally got it, he looked at me like I had just solved something much bigger. That look did something to me. But then came the twist I did not expect. The company announced a major restructuring. Budgets were tightening. Expansion plans were slowing. Travel-heavy roles were being evaluated. The strategy director position I had turned down was suddenly under scrutiny. Rumors started flying about layoffs at the upper levels, about corporate trimming costs. I tried not to pay attention. Then one Monday morning, I walked into the office and felt the tension immediately. People were whispering. Doors were closed. By noon, we knew. The strategy director had been let go. So had 2 regional leads. The St. Louis guy kept his role, but half his team was cut. I sat at my desk staring at the email announcement, feeling something complicated. Not relief exactly. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. If I had taken that role, I would have been in the line of fire. I would have built my life around a title that lasted less than a year. That night, I told Emily what happened. She looked at me quietly for a long moment, and then said something simple. Sometimes what looks like stepping back is actually stepping out of the blast zone. I laughed at that, but the truth was, the restructure did not elevate me either. I was safe. Stable. That word again. Safe and stable do not make headlines. They do not earn applause. They just endure. Still, something unexpected happened in the months that followed. Because while the higher roles churned and shifted, I became the constant. When teams needed grounding, they came to me. When younger managers were overwhelmed, they asked for advice. I was not climbing anymore, but I was solid. And at home, something else was growing. Caleb started asking deeper questions. About college, about work, about what success meant. One night, out of nowhere, he asked me if I ever wished I had a bigger job. The question caught me off guard. I could have lied, could have said no without hesitation. Instead, I told him the truth. Sometimes, I said, but not enough to miss this. He nodded slowly. I do not know what he took from that, but I know what I felt. Choosing family did not mean there were no consequences. There were. Less money than I could have had, less prestige, fewer titles, and sometimes a quiet ache when I thought about what might have been. But there was something else too. Presence. And I was starting to understand that presence does not shout. It just shows up. Still, I had no idea how much that decision would matter until the year everything at home almost fell apart. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a budget review meeting when my phone buzzed 3 times in a row. I normally ignored personal calls during work hours, but something in my chest tightened when I saw Emily's name. I stepped out into the hallway and answered. Her voice was steady, but thin, too controlled. There has been an accident, she said. Caleb. A bike. A car that did not stop quickly enough. He was conscious. He was breathing, but they were taking him to the hospital. I do not remember grabbing my keys. I do not remember telling anyone I was leaving. I just remember the drive feeling endless and too short at the same time. When I got to the hospital, Emily was sitting in a stiff plastic chair outside an exam room, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. She looked up when she saw me, and the relief in her eyes nearly broke me. Caleb had a broken leg, a concussion, cuts along his arms. Nothing life-threatening, the doctor said, but the word surgery was used. I sat by his bed when they wheeled him into recovery. His face looked smaller somehow, fragile, and for the first time in years, work did not even flicker in my mind. The surgery went well. Recovery, though, was slow. For weeks, Caleb could not walk. He could not go to school. He was frustrated and embarrassed, especially when friends stopped by and did not know what to say. Emily and I took shifts at first, but something became clear quickly. He wanted me there, not because Emily was not enough. She was incredible, steady, patient, but he looked for me. When the pain flared up, when he felt restless, when he needed help adjusting his cast. One afternoon, as I was helping him maneuver from the couch to a chair, he winced and then looked up at me with this quiet seriousness. I am glad you are here, he said. Not dramatic, not tearful, just honest. In that moment, the weight of every meeting I had ever prioritized over dinner felt distant and small. At work, the absence was noticed. Richard called me into his office when I returned after taking a few days off. He said he understood. Family emergencies happen. But he also reminded me that leadership required availability. There it was again. The unspoken rule. I could feel the old pressure trying to reattach itself to me. But something had shifted. I told him plainly that my family needed me right now, that I would fulfill my responsibilities, but I would not be taking on extra travel for a while. He nodded, but I saw it in his eyes. Another mark against the fast track. Weeks turned into months. Physical therapy appointments. Follow-ups. School accommodations. I drove Caleb to every session. Sat in those sterile rooms watching him struggle to bend his leg, sweat on his forehead, teeth clenched. There were days he snapped at us. Days he cried from frustration. I was there for all of it. And something unexpected happened. We talked. Really talked. About fear. About embarrassment. About feeling weak. One night, as I was adjusting the pillows under his leg, he said something that settled deep in my chest. If you were always at work, this would be way worse. He did not say it accusingly. He said it like a fact. I realized then that the consequences of my earlier choice were not abstract anymore. They were tangible. Had I taken that strategy director role, I would have been on a plane half the month. I would have been FaceTiming from hotel rooms while Emily handled the hospital visits alone. I would have told myself I was doing what was necessary. Instead, I was there. But the cost still existed. That year, my performance review was flat. No promotion. No significant raise. Marcus moved up. So did 2 others. At the company holiday party, I overheard someone refer to me as solid but not aggressive. It stung. But later that same night, I came home to find Caleb asleep on the couch, cast propped up, waiting for me to say goodnight, even though he knew I had been home all evening. He just wanted the ritual. I carried him to bed, careful not to jar his leg. And as I turned off the light, I realized something that finally quieted the doubt. I had not chosen the easier path. I had chosen the one that would not abandon the people who counted on me when it mattered most. Still, I did not yet understand how deeply that decision would shape the man my son would become. That part would not reveal itself until years later. Time does not make dramatic announcements when it moves forward. It just does. Caleb healed. Slowly at first, then all at once. The cast came off. The crutches disappeared. The limp faded until one day I realized I had not noticed it in weeks. Life returned to something like normal. At work, I settled into my role the way you settle into a well-worn chair. It fit. It was familiar. It did not elevate me, but it did not threaten me either. The younger managers kept climbing. Marcus eventually became a regional lead. He traveled constantly, his social media filled with airport lounges and hotel views. We grabbed coffee one afternoon when he was back in town. He looked tired in a way that was hard to disguise. He talked about numbers, about pressure from above, about his son starting kindergarten and how he had missed the first week because he was in Phoenix. He said it casually. I did not comment. I just listened. At home, something quieter was building. Caleb started high school. Sophie grew into that awkward middle school phase where doors close harder than necessary and conversations feel like negotiations. I was there for it. The late-night talks, the awkward questions, the slammed doors followed by soft knocks an hour later. There were moments when I still felt the sting of comparison. At company town halls, executives would spotlight high performers. Names flashed on slides. Bonuses announced. Travel-heavy roles praised as driving the future. I clapped like everyone else. And sometimes, when I got back to my desk, I would stare at my reflection in the dark computer screen and wonder if I had settled. The word haunted me. Settled. But then there were nights like the one when Sophie came home from school in tears because a group of girls had turned on her. She locked herself in her room. Emily tried first. Then I knocked. At first, there was silence. Then a small, broken voice telling me to go away. I did not. I sat outside her door and talked about nothing for 10 minutes. About the weather. About the dog. About a dumb mistake I made in 9th grade. Eventually, the door opened. She cried into my shirt like she used to when she was 5. I stayed up with her until nearly midnight, just listening. The next morning, I still had a meeting at 8. But that night mattered more. Years passed like that. No dramatic promotions. No flashy titles. Steady raises. Predictable reviews. Reliable. Consistent. Team player. I became the guy they leaned on when things needed fixing quietly. Not the visionary. The stabilizer. And at home, something else was happening that I did not fully grasp until later. Caleb started asking about my career choices again. This time, he was older. Sharper. One evening, while we were washing dishes, he asked if I ever regretted not chasing more. The question hung in the air. I thought about the strategy director role. About Denver. About the life I could have built on business cards and airline miles. I thought about it, I admitted. I still do sometimes. He nodded. Then he said something that stopped me cold. I think I would have been different if you were gone a lot. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. In that moment, I understood something that had taken me years to see. The consequences of my decision were not just about my career. They were shaping him. Still, doubt has a way of resurfacing. When I turned 50, the company hired a new vice president. He was 10 years younger than me. Sharp, energetic, aggressive. In our first meeting, he talked about identifying high-potential leaders and streamlining legacy positions. Legacy. That was me. For the first time, I wondered if the safety I had chosen would eventually push me out altogether. And then, one afternoon, Caleb walked into the kitchen with college acceptance letters in his hand. And everything shifted again. Caleb did not say anything when he dropped the letters on the kitchen counter. He just stood there, hands in his hoodie pocket, trying to look calm. But I could see it in his eyes. This mattered. Emily came in from the living room, drying her hands on a dish towel. Sophie hovered behind her, pretending not to care, but watching closely. He opened the first envelope slowly. Accepted. The second one. Accepted. The third. Accepted. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. Sophie squealed and jumped on him. I just stood there, feeling something heavy and light at the same time. Then he opened the last one. It was from a school out of state. Competitive. Prestigious. The kind of place people relocate for. The kind of place that accelerates everything. He read it quietly, then looked up at me. Accepted. There it was again. A fork in the road. That night, after the celebration settled down, Caleb came into the garage while I was pretending to organize tools. He leaned against the workbench and asked the question I knew was coming. What would you do? I did not pretend to misunderstand. We talked about cost, about distance, about opportunity. The out-of-state school would stretch us financially. It would mean loans, adjustments, fewer comforts. The local school was solid, safe, affordable. I could see him wrestling with it. And then he said something that made my chest tighten. I do not want to leave if it makes things harder for you and Mom. There it was. The same calculation I had made years earlier. Trade-offs. I realized, standing in that garage, that he had been watching me his entire life. Not just listening to what I said, watching what I chose. I told him something I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Do not shrink your life to make mine easier. He frowned. I explained that my choices were mine, that he did not owe me smaller dreams because I had chosen differently. For a moment, I saw a flicker of relief cross his face. Then something else. Understanding. A week later, he chose the out-of-state school. Not recklessly, not impulsively, confidently. When we dropped him off that fall, the campus buzzed with possibility. Students dragging suitcases. Parents pretending not to tear up. Emily cried openly. I held it together until we walked back to the car. On the drive home, the house felt different. Quieter. And for the first time in years, I felt the full weight of time. All those evenings at the kitchen table. All those baseball practices. All those hospital visits. They were over. At work, the new vice president called me into his office the following month. He spoke in corporate language about restructuring, about modernization. Then he offered me something unexpected, an early retirement package. Not mandatory, but encouraged. A polite way of saying I was no longer central to the future they were building. I drove home that day without anger. Just clarity. The fast track I had stepped off years ago was now a distant highway, and I was standing somewhere else entirely. That evening, Sophie sat across from me at the dinner table and asked if I would still be around when she started applying to colleges. I smiled. Where else would I be? But the real answer to that question would not reveal itself until much later. Because the true consequence of my choice was not about retirement packages or missed promotions. It was about what my children would choose when their own forks in the road appeared. And that answer came quietly, on a phone call I almost missed. The phone rang on a Thursday evening while I was standing in the backyard, watering a patch of grass that never seemed to grow right. I almost ignored it. Unknown number. But something told me to answer. It was Caleb. His voice sounded older somehow. Not deeper, just steadier. He did not waste time with small talk. He told me he had been offered something. A job. Not just any job. A high-paying consulting role in New York. Prestigious firm. Fast track. The kind of opportunity people build their entire resumes around. There was a catch. It would mean 80-hour weeks. Constant travel. Little room for anything else. He paused. Then he said there was something else too. He and his girlfriend had been talking about getting serious. About building something stable. She had a job offer in Chicago. He asked me what I thought. And in that moment, I felt the full circle of it. Years ago, I had stood in an office with a similar offer in front of me. Now my son stood at his own fork in the road. I could have told him what to do. I could have pushed him toward prestige, toward the title that would look impressive at family gatherings. Instead, I told him the truth. I said success always demands something. Sometimes it demands sleep. Sometimes it demands peace. And sometimes it demands time you can never get back. I told him I had wrestled with that same choice. That I still wondered, sometimes, what might have happened if I had chased more. Then I told him something I had only fully understood in hindsight. No one at your office will remember the nights you stayed late 10 years from now, I said. But the people at your dinner table will. There was silence on the other end. Then he asked me something that nearly took the air out of my lungs. Did you ever feel like you lost something by choosing us? I looked at the house. At the kitchen light glowing through the window. At Emily moving inside. I thought about the promotions I did not take. The titles that never landed next to my name. The retirement package sitting in a folder on my desk. And I answered honestly. Yes, I said. I lost some things. I paused. But I gained more. He did not respond right away. Then he said he needed to think. A week later, he called back. He had turned down the New York job. He accepted a position in Chicago. Smaller firm. More reasonable hours. slower climb. He said he wanted to build something that did not require him to disappear to maintain it. I did not cheer. I did not say I was proud in some dramatic way. I just felt something settle inside me. Years earlier, I had worried that stepping off the fast track meant stepping into obscurity, that I would look back and see only missed opportunities. Instead, I saw something else. I saw a son who had watched closely, who had learned that ambition and presence are not enemies, but they do compete, and who chose consciously. That night, Emily and I sat on the back porch again, like we had so many years before. The air smelled like fall. I told her about the call. She smiled softly and said, "You did not just choose us once." I realized she was right. Choosing family was not a single decision. It was a pattern. 1,000 small no's to the world and yes at home. Did I have the corner office? No. Did I retire with headlines and accolades? No. But when I look at my life now, I do not measure it in titles. I measure it in evenings, in hospital rooms, in baseball games, in quiet talks outside closed bedroom doors. Success required trade-offs. I just chose which ones I was willing to make. And in the end, I did not sacrifice my family for my career. I accepted the consequences, and I would make the same choice again.